The other side, Trump and his sycophants, let me tell you something. They love to talk a good game about freedom, right? They love to cloak themselves in the blanket of freedom all the time. They love to talk a good game. But hear me on this. It sure as hell isn't freedom to say you can go vote, but he's going to pick the winner. That is not freedom.
That was from last night's opening act for the Harris-Walz announcement speech. That was the mega-talented Josh Shapiro, governor of Pennsylvania. Hi again, everybody. It's 5 o'clock in the East. The threat of that right that he's talking about there being taken away from American voters was delivered a win yesterday in the important battleground state of Georgia. That state's election board approved a new rule having to do with Republicans' latest attacks on our democracy, on our election systems, the certification process. The rule establishes new criteria for officially confirming election results in the state of Georgia. The certifying happens, quote, after reasonable inquiry that the tabulation and canvassing of the election are complete and accurate, and that the results are a true and accurate accounting of all votes cast in that election. Now, the New York Times explains what that actually means. Quote, though seemingly innocuous, the language implies that local election officials are awarded a level of discretion in the certification process, a suggestion that runs counter to decades of settled Georgia law delineating how results are officially certified. State law dictates that officials shall certify an election, making the process effectively ministerial. Disputes over alleged fraud or major errors are typically left to recounts in courts. Now, attacks on certifying election results have intensified since the 2020 election, and it is clear the ex-president is gearing up to have certification questions play a major role this time around. Over the weekend, Donald Trump called out the 3 Republicans on the Georgia State Election Board by name who ended up voting for this new rule.
I don't know if you've heard, but the Georgia State Election Board is in a very positive way. This is a very positive thing, Marjorie. They're on fire. They're doing a great job. 3 members, Janice Johnson, Rick Jeffries, and Janelle King. 3 people are all pit bulls fighting for honesty, transparency, and victory. They're fighting.
Fighting who? And fighting for what? The entire state election is administered by Republicans at the state level. Republican governor, Republican secretary of state. So again, why is he calling them out, and what is he talking about? What are they fighting against? Georgia passed its voter integrity law in 2021 despite the findings by Republicans that there was no widespread voter fraud in the state of Georgia during the 2020 election, that Joe Biden had legitimately won. They did 3 counts. So shouldn't they be bragging about the security and supremacy of their system? This fight isn't limited to Georgia. This may be the ball game for Donald Trump this time. Reporting in Rolling Stone last week identified nearly 70 pro-Trump election conspiracy theorists across several swing states currently working as county election officials who have questioned the validity of elections or delayed or refused to certify results. According to the nonpartisan group Protect Democracy, since the 2020 election, members of state and local boards have voted against certification more than 20 times across 8 states. Our friend and voting rights attorney Mark Elias puts it like this, quote, with fewer than 100 days until the election, Republicans are building an election subversion war machine. Protecting ourselves from that war machine is where we begin the hour with some of our favorite experts and friends. The aforementioned voting rights attorney, founder of the site Democracy Docket, Mark Elias, is back. Plus, writer and editor for Protect Democracy, Amanda Carpenter's back. And New York Times reporter who has been reporting on this for years and specifically in a big piece with Jim Rutenberg in the last couple of weeks, Nick Corsiniti is back. Nick, I've said this multiple times, but I think you put the goings-on in Georgia on the radar for us with your reporting there. Tell me what this board does to aid Trump, in Trump's mind. He's calling them out at his rallies.
Well, what they did yesterday is something that Trump and Republicans and his allies have been trying to do across the country. And that is take the process of election certification, which, as we mentioned, and as you mentioned at the top here, is something that's always been ministerial. And what that means is it's basically automatic. The law says shall, which means you must take election results. You go through the normal process of checking them that you normally would, and then you certify them and pass them on. These county officials are not empowered by these ministerial duties to conduct their own investigations or insert their own opinions on the validity of these elections. But a lot of Trump allies have been trying to do this across the country, as I reported a few weeks ago with my colleague Jim Brutenberg, but they haven't been successful. They've been trying to do this through courts. That hasn't gone anywhere. They've been trying to do this through just having local officials refuse to certify and see if that gets them some precedent through a challenge. That hasn't worked either. So what the State Board of Election did in Georgia yesterday was give that argument its first sense of validity. They are able to establish rules that local county officials all throughout Georgia are supposed to follow. They're not meant to be a lawmaking board. So it's highly possible that what they did yesterday is illegal and will be met with legal challenges, perhaps by some of the people also on this panel. But they gave an opening to this idea that certification is indeed discretionary at the local level. And what that could do, if we were to rewind the clock 4 years ago when former President Trump was trying to overturn his loss in 2020, and he was calling election officials in Wayne County, Michigan, county board members, in Wayne County, Michigan, saying, please don't certify. We were in an unknown about what that would do. Would that be able to forestall a loss? Would that be able to change things? So they're trying to bring this back in an effort that, to possibly short circuit a loss or anything like that, bring this question of certification into the realm of uncertainty. And that's what the Georgia State Board of Elections did yesterday.
Mark Elias, I want to read what you wrote, but I just, for Trump, who's so obsessed with the size of his wins and, wearing a superhero shirt when he survives COVID, it feels like this massive sort of telegraphing that he knows he's going to lose. Just talk about the tactic and what it telegraphs.
Yeah, look, Donald Trump lost the popular vote in 2016 by 3 million votes. Every time someone would say, Donald Trump won in 2016, and this is because of the American people. No, he won in 2016 because of the Electoral College. In 2020, he lost the popular vote by 7 million votes. Okay, he and the Republicans are running out of runway. They are running out of way to count on the Electoral College and a bunch of other structural advantages that they have to counteract the fact that more Americans want to vote for Kamala Harris than want to vote for him. So what they are left with is two things. Number one, making it harder to vote, making voter suppression, which you and I have talked about. And then the second, which you and I, frankly, have been talking about for years now, it feels shorter, but it's been for years, is they want to be able to cheat after the election. So they want to make it harder to vote and easier to cheat. And the way they are going to cheat, the way they tried to cheat in 2020, when I litigated against them and beat Donald Trump and his allies 60 times in court, the way they tried to cheat is through what ballots get counted and what ballots don't get counted. And there's no better way to do that than through the certification process, which, as Nick pointed out, they tried to do in 2020 in Wayne County, Michigan. In 2022, they tried it again. They tried in Arizona. My law firm, we sued Cochise County because Cochise County wouldn't certify the election results. We sued Luzerne County, Pennsylvania, because they wouldn't certify the election results. And ultimately, we were able to win those lawsuits because this is a ministerial act. This is a ceremonial function. This is not a opportunity for these people to conduct their own independent investigations. And what it says about Donald Trump is that he knows he's going to lose the popular vote. He knows he's probably going to lose the election if it is free and fair. But he doesn't care. He revels in the fact that he is an authoritarian. He admires the dictators, and he is willing to do. And he has built a campaign and a party that is willing to literally do anything. If they were willing to storm the Capitol to prevent certification on January 6th, what do you think they would do in a county in Georgia?
What is the protection against that, Mark?
So I think it's a few things. First of all, it is the great work that Nick and you and others in the media do who call attention to this. It's one of the reasons why I started Democracy Documents, why we've written on this topic, because it is important for people to know this is going on, because for some of these elected officials or appointed officials, they have to live in these communities. They have to look at their neighbors, and it is harder for them to do that if what they are doing is public rather than in the darkness of night. The second thing is that there's a big obligation here for the legal establishment. You know, lawyers like me, lawyers like many other, like at Protect Democracy, you know, have a big obligation here. Every lawyer who swears an oath to the law and the Constitution has an obligation to fight against this kind of activity. And then finally, you know, we talk a lot about the fact that Republicans run Georgia, and periodically they get praise that sometimes I don't agree with. But where's Brad Raffensperger? Where's Brian Kemp? How about they bring a lawsuit? How about Brian Kemp brings a lawsuit, and Secretary of State brings a lawsuit to prevent this from happening? Where are they?
While I have you, I have to ask you about some of your comments during the period where Donald Trump and his allies were trying to overthrow the lawful election. As you know, that's a big issue. I showed some of your involvement. Here you were on December 14th speaking about the elector fraud, which, as you know, has now been charged in many states. You referred to it as, and I want to be accurate, a, quote, alternate slate of electors. December 14th, 2020. Take a listen.
We have more than enough time to right the wrong of this fraudulent election result and certify Donald Trump as the winner of the election. As we speak today, an alternate slate of electors in the contested states is going to vote, and we're going to send those results up to Congress.
You were quite clear on air about that. We have the headlines about all the different states with independent, separate authorities, separate jurisdictions, you know, federalism. But they've all moved towards the same issue, Stephen, and I want to be very clear. You're not named as a defendant in these cases. But the people doing what you were talking about in that clip, which you clearly had knowledge of in advance, the people who were committing or attempting to commit elector fraud against their state or the national government in states that you know Donald Trump lost, appealed all the way to the Supreme Court and lost, those are now being dealt with as criminal cases. What do you say to your prior role on that? And can you tonight, you disclaim 2025, can you disclaim these kind of efforts in the next election or not?
So of all of the most ridiculous communist lawfare schemes, surely at the top of the list is going after Republican lawyers and Republican activists who served as alternate electors so that Congress on January 6 could lawfully and in the due course of their duties consider election fraud claims. It is a patriotic act for a citizen to volunteer themselves to stand as an alternate elector so that Congress can hear and consider claims of illegality and unconstitutionality in the states, and then Congress can decide if they want to ratify those claims or not.
Well, I'll jump in. I'll let you finish, but I'm just going to say fact check false. That's fact check false. Elector fraud is a crime, and each of these cases will be adjudicated individually.
What is the fraud? Is it your contention that the Michigan alternate electors were not self-described as alternate electors? They held press conferences. Everybody said these are alternate electors. They're going to be considered by Congress.
Okay, I'm going to address you, and then I'm going to let you have time to respond, Stephen. As you know, there are some states where there was careful language about saying if a court decision or something changed the outcome. That was one thing. There were many states, as you know, and this is why there are cases where people not only on the 14th, but all the way up and through January 6th, continued to maintain that in states they lost, they wanted to be the fraudulent representative of a victory, and they lost. And as you know, submitting false information in election context or other context to the government is fraud.
Is it? Do you really believe, as you sit there today, that there was ever any doubt or question as to which was the slate of electors that the state had chosen versus which was the alternate slate of electors being sent to Congress?
Stephen, again, respectfully, that's the whole, Stephen, respectfully, again, we want to have this dialogue, but respectfully, that's the whole problem. That you, and we showed you on air talking about it, and your team and your plan was to create that doubt and then use it as a pretext to overthrow the certification on January 6th. And so people are asking, are you going to, I'll let you finish. I've given you a lot of time. Stephen, people are asking, are you going to do that again this cycle, this election? Go ahead.
again, there's not a more clear-cut case in the country of the ruthless weaponization of government against innocent people than going after people who stood up patriotically and volunteered themselves to be alternate electors so that Congress could perform its duties under the Electoral Count Act. Why did they change the Electoral Count Act? Specifically because they knew and understood that every action that was taken was consistent with the letter and text of the law. And if you want to talk about democracy, because you brought up the issue, and yes, I am going to go back there, about the ebb and flow of illegal immigration. Here's what matters.
We gave time to that. I have limited time. I've given you a lot of time. I'm not going back to immigration. Take a listen to what Trump allies were saying about the vice president at the time on this topic. Take a listen to Epstein and others. Take a listen.
The remedy was for Vice President Pence, as the quarterback in the Green Bay sweep, to remand those votes back to the 6 battleground states.
The vice president's got a lot of power, and that's very important to recognize.
If Mike Pence does the right thing, we win the election.
You sat with the January 6th committee, and I should mention you participated. Some other people didn't. That's part of the rule of law. They wrote that on the morning of January 6th, the president spoke with you, Stephen Miller, about what he would say hours later. At 11:30 a.m., Stephen Miller's assistant emailed the speechwriting team, and we can put this up, reinsert the Mike Pence lines. The final written draft had the following Pence reference, quote, "And we will see whether Pence enters history as a truly great and courageous leader." So your position then, and you worked directly with Donald Trump that day, was arguing that the call was ultimately up to Pence. Is that right? To the vice president?
By definition, that's true. And I know you want to go over this ground again and again and again, and that's fine. Axiomatically, that's true, because that's why Congress came back and revised the law to make the vice president's role ceremonial rather than official, which it was in the original version. This whole all this nonsense, all the lies, all the hoaxing about this, January 6th and the days leading up to it was a legal process to raise objections to Congress. Congress, if those objections were validated, would then send back to the states the opportunity to ratify an alternate slate of elections.
I've spoken about that. I'm familiar with that. You said again and again, just to be clear, this is your first time on this program. So it's not again and again for us discussing it. This is us discussing newsworthy items that I don't know that you've always been asked about. So if you thought the vice president has that role and that's legal, and you've just emphasized that, and that stems from the Constitution, then I guess you must be fine with Vice President Harris making the call this January.
Again, there's not just the vice president. The Congress itself has to vote on and ratify these propositions as well, too. So there's a role for the Congress, the House, the Senate.
But you're good with Vice President Harris doing it this time, because you wrote that in the speech.
Go
ahead.
More importantly, Ari, they rewrote the law. They rewrote the law. So the vice president's role has now been downgraded from official to ceremonial. But I just want to underscore.
So you do feel differently. If Pence is the vice president, it's fine. If Harris is the vice president, it's not. I mean, that's what you're saying now. Again, people want to know what you think as they make their decisions about what to vote for. Go ahead.
They rewrote the law. Look, I care about my democracy every bit as much, if not more, than you.
I'm just trying to get answers from you. We're not in a personal dispute about democracy credentials. You wrote that in. You wrote that in on Pence. You played it all the way up to January 6th. You know what happened after that. A lot of other people have been convicted of crimes, Stephen. A
lot of innocent people have been persecuted by a corrupt system. What kind of corrupt system throws Republican lawyers in jail for offering good, sound legal advice, but does nothing with secretaries of state who plainly violated their own state laws and constitutions? How many people are in jail right now? Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are the #1 traffickers of children, girls into sex slavery on planet Earth. Okay. How many people are in jail for that?
We've gone this far, and we've gone this far in an exchange. We're not doing just anything you want to rip off the internet that's false, and we're not doing defamation here. As you know, there's other Trump allies who've gotten a lot of trouble for that. We're not doing that here. You want to talk about democracy. You sound right now. I'll let you respond. We are running over on time, but you sound more outraged about what. Stephen, I'm going to finish the question. I'll give you time. You sound tonight more outraged about what you allege is that double standard, and I've given you time to explain it, than the people who battered the cops and led to deaths and stormed the Capitol. I know in your deposition, because I looked at it, you said you were against the violence. You haven't gotten around to saying that here tonight. Again, it's your time when you answer. But you sound more outraged about that than the actual convicted sedition at the Capitol that day, which, by the way, Donald Trump has floated the idea that he would pardon the seditionists who stormed the Capitol violently. We're running over on time. I will give you a chance to respond to all that.
Yes. I, President Trump, and everyone else have been repeatedly clear about the fact that any violence that took place was unacceptable. That is completely separate and different from throwing a grandmother in jail for 5 years who just said a prayer in a hallway after being ushered in by a Capitol police officer and then left. The weaponization of the government. There's a guy who posted a meme about Hillary Clinton who's in jail right now, Mackey. The weaponization of government is the beginning of the end of American democracy. And every one of your viewers and listeners should understand, when you have a country where you can throw people in jail for violations of misinformation, for engaging in free speech, for engaging in good legal advice, for challenging illegitimate election results, you're not a free country anymore. Right. And I'll tell you the violence I'm outraged about. Right now, there are moms whose daughters are dead and murdered because Kamala Harris let in their killers. And when you have on your program the mother of Jocelyn Nungry, or the mother of Laken Riley, or the mother of any of the other victims, the mother of the girl who was raped in Central Park, any of those families, then you'll be in a position to talk about violence and suffering and death.
I told you I'd give you time. We're not doing a comparison of me to you on everything, but we've given you time so people could hear, as you said, directly from you. That's something we do here, and we've given you a lot of time, and I appreciate the dialogue. Stephen Miller from the Trump campaign and the Trump White House veteran. Thank you, sir.
And we begin tonight with joy. No, not me joy, but the feeling joy. The joy felt by Americans backing the Harris-Walz ticket, a joy that is palpable and pervasive, as illustrated by the massive crowds greeting VP Harris and Governor Walz at their rallies in Wisconsin and Michigan today. It feels like we're experiencing another 2008 Obama moment. The energy, the excitement, the enthusiasm. It feels fun. Imagine that. American politics, joyful again.
In this fight, as Tim Walz likes to point out, we are joyful warriors. Joyful warriors. Because we know that while fighting for a brighter future may be hard work is good work. Hard work is good work.
It's the tale of two tickets. One radiates joy. The other is dour and, frankly, frightening. And this is how you know the Republicans are freaking out about it. Vice President Kamala Harris is criticized for her race, gender, and parental status, but also for laughing. As if an infectious, energizing belly laugh, the literal display of joy, is a bad thing. She loves to laugh with her sister, especially. She is a foodie, trust me. She and I have talked about food, and it is a passion. Cooking with Kamala is a thing on the internet. She will show you everything from her go-to roast chicken to a potato curry with dosa. And she is amazing with kids. Walz, too, a joyful guy. His former students love him. He was a popular and successful high school football coach. He made weird happen. And he's a Midwesterner with big dad energy, who will offer tips on how to fix your car and save money to boot.
This right here is the headlight harness on a 2014 Ford Edge. Ford, this is unacceptable. It burned out hot on the connector. So for $7.99 at Napa Auto Parts here in the city, you can replace this. Just clip off the back, use some shrink wrap connectors on there, tape it back together and put it back in. It's about a 5-minute fix and you're back on the road safe and sound.
Okay, that was a very real throwback video, by the way, just 11 days before Walz won the 2018 election for Minnesota governor. Some of you may be familiar with the beer question in U.S. politics, a thought experiment often utilized by the media or in polling, which says that voters will generally elect the candidate they would rather have a beer with, because victory in American politics often goes not to the candidate who better articulates their platform, but rather who is more likable. You be the judge. Who would you rather have a beer with? Kamala Harris, who dares to laugh, and Tim Walz, the plain-spoken fun uncle who will defend the people he loves? Or Donald Trump, who rambles about sharks and hatred, who makes fun of people, and who smirks but who rarely laughs, and who doesn't seem capable of talking to a child, even his own grandkids, and his cat lady-hating sidekick, J.D. Vance. This guy is really weird, y'all. So weird that the couch meme won't die. Now he's basically stalking the Democratic ticket, stunning reporters today by attempting to confront VP Harris and Governor Walz on the tarmac when their planes arrived in Wisconsin at similar times. Here he is on the tarmac after walking the long stretch toward the vice president's plane, telling reporters, quote, "I just wanted to check out my future plane." What? Like, walking up to the vice president at Air Force Two is not a thing, dude. That is not a thing that normal people do. Thankfully, he did not interact with the vice president herself, and we have Secret Service to thank for that, I'm sure. Vance's weirdness aside, this race is also a reversal of how the parties are normally framed. The Republicans love to attack Democratic elites. But Harris and Walz actually feel like regular, normal, middle-class folks. Yes, they are living extraordinary political lives, but due to hard work, not connections or riches. Harris went to Howard University and HBCU and the University of California, Hastings College of Law. And Walz attended an open admissions teachers college in Northwest Nebraska. Quite the opposite of what we're seeing on the Republican side, with Trump-Vance being the Ivy League ticket, loved by the billionaires. It's quite the elite conundrum for the Republican Party. The so-called populist MAGA movement now bankrolling a celebrity who inherited his wealth and sits on a golden toilet, and who's not out there campaigning, but is instead golfing at his exclusive ritzy resort. And a vice presidential candidate anointed by super weird tech investor Peter Thiel. It's a ticket backed by billionaire tech bros and that wants to unleash Project 2025, the brainchild of rich people on the American people. As we often say on this show, it is a hateful vision that all people should fear, reflected perfectly by the two men who want to execute it. Alencia Johnson, a 2020 Biden-Harris campaign senior advisor, joins me along with Joan Walsh, national affairs correspondent for The Nation, and Stuart Stevens, chief strategist for Mitt Romney's 2012 presidential campaign and senior advisor to the Lincoln Project. Thank you all for being here. Stuart, I do want to start with you because you have run presidential campaigns and you know how hard it is. I mean, Mitt Romney is probably a lovely human being as a person, but he was sort of easily characterized as this sort of elite kind of odd person, right? And that proved really difficult when he was running against Barack Obama, who, despite his name and background, people thinking it was exotic, when you actually heard him, he just sounds like a regular guy you'd play basketball with. So talk about this now dichotomy where the people you'd much rather have a beer with, at least most people, are the Democrats.
Yeah, you look back at that Romney-Obama race, it seems just like a different era in American politics. On Election Day, both of them had favorables of 50%. Think about that. I don't think we'll see that for a long time on the Republican side.
True.
I think this is a tremendous ticket that the Democrats have put together. What I really love about it is the way it embraces two classic American stories. You have this woman daughter of immigrants, who came up, who had tremendous success and achievement because she earned it. And then you have this small town guy, he's like a walking John Mellencamp song, football coach, who taught, it's just really two great American stories coming together. And I think people can relate to that. There was a time when Republicans at least tried to claim the mantle of optimism. I mean, that certainly was true of Reagan. In the Reagan world, to be born in America, you'd won life's lottery. And now that's completely reversed, and the Democrats own that. And I think it's a very powerful force in American politics.
It is. And Joan, you've been covering now VP Kamala Harris for a really long time. She was based in San Francisco, where you were based as a journalist. And I mean, the thing about her, just since I've experienced her as a political figure, is that she hasn't become this happy person. Like, she actually is this happy person, right? She and her sister are hilarious together. They adore each other. But she's always sort of presented herself as sort of like the approachable, prosecutor. And that's how she ran in 2020. I still remember her ads then were like, Shirley Chisholm inspired me. It's like she's not play acting it, and obviously neither is Tim Walz. Talk about her emergence into this moment, because it definitely feels like she and this moment have found each other.
You know, when I did the profile of her last month, Joy, her staff asked to read my 2003 profile. And what they said was, oh my God, she is the same person. She likes to swear. She likes to tell stories. She likes to laugh. She's combative. She's contentious. She will not let you get away with garbage if she thinks you're disrespecting her. But, you know, I think she had a few rough years being staffed poorly, in my opinion, by some of her staff, not all, during the presidential race. And even in the beginning, I would say, in the White House as vice president. And what she's got now is a great, very, very loyal staff who have her back. And I loved that moment last night when Tim Walz said, I have your back. It was very moving to me because she doesn't always have that. And she needs it. She's got the Secret Service, but now she's also got this stalker going around from city to city like a hangdog ex-husband trying to find her. So I trust the Secret Service, but I'm glad that she's got Tim Walz there too. He's on it.
Yeah, it is so weird, Lindsay. It is so weird that, like, Trump is playing golf somewhere while J.D. Vance is, like, stalking the vice president and saying weird stuff to reporters. Like, he's not helping to make it himself not seem weird. But I want to show that, because here's the thing about the play acting. You can actually, in the end, as a politician, only be who you are, right? You can fake it only so much. Here's Donald Trump's campaign today. He posted on his fake Twitter, his pretend version of Twitter, an attack on Governor Walz's handling of the George Floyd protests. We have now started to hear that being a theme of the Trump campaign, the Trump Vance campaign. Well, inconveniently enough, there's always a tape. ABC News has uncovered a call of Donald Trump doing the opposite. Here he is praising Governor Walz's handling of the self-same George Floyd protests in Minneapolis. Here he is on tape.
I know Governor Walz is on the phone, and we spoke, and I fully agree with the way he handled it the last couple of days. But once you called out and you dominated, you took the worst place, and you made it, they didn't even cover it last night because there was so little action. Because you dominated. You dominated. It showed the incredible difference between your great state yesterday and the day before compared to the first few days, which was just absolutely. Nope, never seen it. Absolutely. A police force and take it over. And I don't blame you. I blame the mayor. I mean, I've never seen anything like it.
A helpful reminder that during these protests that they're so angry about Donald Trump was the president of the United States. Here's the spokesman for Carolyn Levitt, a spokesperson for the Trump campaign. This was her response. Said Trump lauded Walz only after the governor heeded his advice to enlist the support of the National Guard, something that the president also can deploy. Your thoughts on this, Alencia, because even their play acting falls apart because there are always tapes.
Well, I'm kind of laughing because I imagine that Governor Walz was like, I cannot believe I'm on the phone with this man and this incoherent speaking. And also, like, let's not forget that this is a person who did not call in or tell his supporters to stand down when they were committing an insurrection on the Capitol, right? And so the contradiction of them trying to put out this narrative when, one, there's this tape, but also we all saw this on January 6th, 2021.
Well, we begin tonight with what Donald Trump had to say on the campaign trail today. And we're done. Because, once again, the laziest presidential campaigner since the invention of jet travel did not campaign again today. There's only about 90 days left in the presidential campaign, and Donald Trump doesn't campaign on most of those days. Donald Trump did not leave his home, as far as we know, today. Didn't get dressed, never put his shoes on. I mean, I'm guessing now, but we don't actually have any evidence at all that Donald Trump got out of bed today, that he shaved or was physically capable of shaving. We don't know if Donald Trump was too tired to walk today or attempt to read a teleprompter, which he does not do well on his best days. But Donald Trump's campaign positions were described on the campaign trail today.
If he is elected, Donald Trump intends to give tax breaks to billionaires and big corporations. He intends to cut Social Security and Medicare. He intends to surrender our fight against the climate crisis, and he intends to end the Affordable Care Act.
While Donald Trump was doing absolutely nothing, the vice president and her new running mate, Tim Walz, campaigned in 2 states today, first Wisconsin this afternoon and then Michigan tonight. In her speech in Detroit tonight, the vice president encountered her first protesters. We will show you how Kamala Harris handled that. But in the audio coverage of the event, you won't be able to actually hear what the protesters were actually saying. You will hear the rest of the crowd trying to drown out what the protesters were saying with the chant of Kamala, Kamala. NBC's Nnamdi Egwuonu reports that the protesters were shouting, Kamala, you can't hide, you're supporting genocide. And this is how the vice president responded.
Because we believe in democracy. Everyone's voice matters, but I am speaking now. I am speaking now. You know what? If you want Donald Trump to win, then say that, otherwise I'm speaking.
The strength of that stare is more powerful than anything I've ever seen a candidate do in a moment like that. No presidential candidate has ever handled a moment like that better than Kamala Harris. Donald Trump doesn't have moments like that because no one who disagrees with him is allowed at his occasional campaign rallies. And so he will never be shouted at by those protesters. The vice president was welcomed to Detroit today by our first guest tonight, the Michigan Democratic Party chair, Lavora Barnes.
Our ticket is a winner, and it couldn't be more different than those Republicans. The Republican ticket consists of a convicted felon and his weirdo running mate.
The vice president began her remarks tonight in Detroit with gratitude to the man who chose her as vice president and was the first to endorse her 2.5 weeks ago for President of the United States.
Today, I also bring greetings from our incredible President Joe Biden. That's right. Joe. That's right. And I know we are all deeply, deeply grateful to Joe for his lifetime of service to our nation. And we thank you, Joe Biden, each and every day for all you are and all you still have yet to do. Thank you, Joe. 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 That's right. I'm going to tell him what you said.
Other chants broke out today. The chant, lock him up, broke out during the vice president's speech in Wisconsin and again tonight in Michigan. Chanting lock him up about someone who has been convicted of 34 felonies and is facing a sentencing hearing next month is very different from the Trump chant of lock her up about someone who has never been charged with a crime. And the vice president's response to that chant is very, very different from Donald Trump's.
As Attorney General of California, I took on one of the country's largest for-profit colleges that scammed students. Well, Donald Trump ran a for-profit college that scammed students. You remember that? As a prosecutor, I specialize in cases of sexual abuse. Well, Donald Trump was found liable for committing sexual abuse. As Attorney General, I held the big Wall Street banks accountable for fraud. Well, Donald Trump was just found guilty of fraud. 34 counts, to be exact. Hold on. Here's the thing. The courts are going to handle that. We're going to beat them in November. We'll beat them in November. We'll handle that.
Donald Trump lies to his sadly gullible audiences that every economic problem can be solved with drill, baby, drill, even though the United States of America is already the largest energy producer in the world. Here's what the vice president said tonight in Michigan about inflation.
We believe in a future where we lower the cost of living for America's families, so they have a chance not just to get by, but to get ahead. Because look, while our economy is doing well by many measures, prices for everyday things like groceries are still too high. You know it and I know it. When I was Attorney General, I went after price-fixing schemes. And when I am president, it will be my day one priority to fight to bring down prices, to take on the big corporations that engage in illegal price gouging, take on corporate landlords that unfairly raise rents on working families, to take on big pharma and cap the cost of prescription drugs for all Americans. That is the work we will do together. And all of this to say, unlike Donald Trump, I will always put the middle class and working families first. Because Coach Walz and I know the middle class built this great country of ours, and when the middle class is strong, America is strong.
Tonight, the vice president told Michigan voters and the country and the world why Donald Trump should never again be president of the United States.
Last month, the United States Supreme Court basically just told the former president, who has been convicted of fraud, that going forward, he will be immune no matter what he does in the White House. Think about what that means. Think about what that means. The man has openly vowed, if reelected, that he will be a dictator on day one. Think about what that means when he said that he will even, quote, terminate the Constitution of the United States. Because let us be very clear. Someone who suggests we should terminate the Constitution of the United States should never again stand behind the seal of the President of the United States. Never again.
Never again. The vice president told her Wisconsin supporters this afternoon and her Michigan supporters tonight what she needs from them to win those important states.
So in the next 90 days, we need you to use your power. We need you to knock on some doors. We need you to register folks to vote. We need you to organize and energize and mobilize heard. So, Michigan, I ask you, are you ready to make your voices heard? Do we believe in freedom? Do we believe in opportunity? Do we believe in the promise of America? And are we ready to fight for it? And when we fight, we win. God bless you, and God bless you.
For weeks, Donald Trump has tried to distance himself from Project 2025, which is an ultra-conservative policy blueprint for a second Trump administration, organized and written by the Heritage Foundation. Trump has said in the past, though, that he's moderated his comments since, that he has no idea who's in charge of Project 2025, and he didn't even know what it was. But Project 2025 and Donald Trump are inseparable. At least 140 Trump administration alumni helped create this document. Trump's running mate, J.D. Vance, wrote the foreword of an upcoming book authored by the architect of Project 2025, its new leader, Kevin Roberts. Today, we learned that publication of that book has been conveniently delayed until a week after the election. And tonight, the Washington Post reports that in April 2022, Donald Trump shared a 45-minute private flight with Roberts en route to a Heritage Foundation conference where Trump said in a keynote address, quote, "The group's policy proposals are going to lay the groundwork and detailed plans for exactly what our movement will do," end quote. Our movement. Joining me now, Angelo Carusone, President and CEO of Media Matters for America, a nonprofit group that has been doing extensive research on Project 2025 and combating misinformation around it. Angelo, good to see you again.
Thanks for having me.
You know, my mind went to you because you've really studied this thing, and there are sections and chapters on literally every part of government. But fundamentally, if you've gone through this document, what you understand is the most important part of it are not necessarily the specific, very right-wing policies therein, but the idea that it restructures the entire federal government in a way that the next president could not easily fix.
That's exactly right. I mean, it is designed to be not an aspirational set of ideas or just, proposals or value structures. It's an actual plan. And you know that because the one document that's not public is not the policy, that 900-page policy document that everybody's talking about, but rather the 180-day agenda document, which is a step-by-step instruction manual for what the first 180 days in the administration are going to look like, what every single office, what every single department, what every key entity is supposed to do. And then underneath that is this thing called Schedule F, which is identifying thousands of key federal government positions that need to be terminated immediately, or firing those individuals. And already they have a database of more than 4,000 people that they pre-vetted that would immediately be slotted into those roles. So it's both a transition team and a deep plan already baked into one. And the design here, as you noted, is to restructure government and also do it in such a way that it can't really be unwound, but rather worse, turn it into an instrument of Donald Trump's revenge.
So this Schedule F, the most boring thing I've ever heard in terms of a name, and meant to not make you think of anything, except that what we don't think about, whether you are from the United States or Canada or the UK or Germany or France or any of these places, is that you don't know the names of the people in the civil service by design. Other than the top person, the minister of something or the secretary of a department, you know no one else's names because they are either career people or experts. Schedule F and Project 25 changes that.
That's right. And as you noted, it's civil service. I mean, the idea here is that these people are doing public service, right? I mean, they're not doing it for the money. They're not doing it for the hours, right, or the perks. They're doing it because it is actually a service. And one of the things that Schedule F does is reclassify what would be civil service positions and sort of reorient them around something that allows them to be treated as political appointees. And that's fundamentally the biggest difference.
We're not talking about 50 jobs or 500 jobs or 5,000 jobs. We're talking about 50,000 positions in the American government that you and I would think of as civil service jobs occupied by people whose names we don't know and will never know, reclassified as political jobs. That sounds like countries that we talk about that have unstable governments.
That's right. And if you think about this in the context of what the right wing has railed against, not just their ideas, but one of the things that we heard over and over and over again was that there was the deep state that was stopping Donald Trump from implementing a lot of the policies that the rest of the right wing really wanted. And this is really a way to sort of go at what the right wing has identified as the deep state. And ultimately, that's just, as you noted, it's the civil servants. But that's why they see this as a mechanism. And this is the part that's so scary about it. It's not just what's being proposed. It's that they actually, unlike last time around when Trump got into office and, after he lost the last election, this time they actually have a resourced plan and the personnel to implement it. And what you're seeing here is sort of this backsliding around Project 2025 or attempts to do that is, you notice that they're not really rejecting the notions around it or the ideas. And there's sort of this wink and a nod and a dance. And even the way they're doing it is kind of lying, as this most recent video, picture sort of illustrates. And that's the part that's so unsettling. They know it's not popular, but they are bent on sort of implementing it. And we should all be deeply concerned about it.
And Kevin Roberts, the guy who was in charge of the Heritage Foundation, have come out and said, of course they're going to disavow it. That's good politics. They should disavow it. But once they come into government, this is the plan. And everybody involved, no one involved in it is disavowing it. And these are people who are in Trump's inner circle. This is not peripheral people who had minor jobs in the Trump administration.
That's exactly right. And look, I know why maybe perhaps they wanted to delay the release of this book. I mean, especially until after the election, now that there's a spotlight, now that the media is paying attention to it and asking the kinds of questions and looking into this. I know why, because they would look into the book. We have a copy of it, actually. And one of the things that Kevin Roberts writes about in his book is he describes that having a child should not be considered an individual choice. And there's an entire argument in the book about how that it's not a personal choice, that it's something that society should impose on people, which is why they're opposed to contraception and why that needs to be banned. And part of what that book is designed to marshal a narrative around the very policy that would ultimately be implemented as a result of Project 2025.